On Tuesday, March 2nd, 1999, a light rain fell over Dayton, Ohio, and left Linden Avenue with that dark, glassy shine of wet pavement, returning headlights and the sodium lamps on the poles as reflections. At 6:12 p.m., as happened whenever the beverage cooler's compressor kicked on and drew power from the old circuit, the video store's fluorescent lights on the corner of Wyoming Street flickered for an instant, a small but constant detail, like a reminder that everything there depended on things already worn out. On the door, a faded sign announced 2 for 1 on Tuesdays, printed on plain paper, yellowed at the edges by sun and humidity. Behind the counter, a man with his sleeves rolled up, a pen tucked behind his ear, stared at a black-covered notebook where small numbers had not balanced for weeks. Rent, electricity, phone, restocking, what came in as cash and checks, and what simply did not come in. Outside, the city kept its usual noise, tires slicing through puddles, a bus passing heavy, the distant bell of a church on East 3rd Street. But inside the sound was different. The continuous hum of the lamps, the intermittent click of the door chime, and the feeling that time was running short. If the video store couldn't find a way to stay alive until summer, the next quarter's rent in that old brick building would not be paid. In a market where small businesses survived on short contracts and frequent adjustments. And what would be lost would not be only shelves and plastic cases. It would be a place where people from a neighborhood met because of a movie and ended up talking about work, school, illness, and the family. Longing for somewhere that wasn't Dayton, in a city that still carried marks of industrial restructuring, and a downtown that had lost traffic to commercial areas to the south. The owner's name was Paul Kline. He was 39, his hair darkened by rain and worry, and he moved in a way that gave away years of carrying boxes of VHS and then DVD without thinking about the weight, dealing with plastic cases, rewound tapes, and now discs in fragile cases that scratched easily. The store, Gem City Video, was small but organized like a library. Tapes by genre, colored labels for new releases, and a neighborhood favorites section where Paul pinned handwritten notes recommending titles, taped on with clear tape and replaced when they started to peel. That night, the phone rang twice, someone asking if Titanic had come back yet, someone else wanting to know if the tape of The Sixth Sense was already available for pre-reservation. And then it went quiet, the handset resting beside the register terminal. The door chime sounded only once, and it was for someone who bought a pack of microwave popcorn and left without renting anything, leaving in the air the sweet smell of artificial butter mixed with carpet and plastic. Paul was not a man of speeches. When he spoke, it was in the tone of someone trying not to take up too much space, as if each sentence had to fit between one return and the next. Even so, that week he had been repeating, to anyone who came in and was willing to listen, the same explanation, almost technical. A big chain was arriving with promotions he could not match, supported by scale, distribution contracts, and advertising that a neighborhood store had no way to pay for. In a new commercial block near the Dayton Mall, to the south, billboards already promised 3 for 1 on the weekend, free membership, guaranteed new releases, big letters for people driving on wide roads. And beyond that, there was news of a service that still sounded strange, mentioned in a Dayton Daily News article in February. An online movie club that mailed DVDs with no late fees, using the regular postal system and standardized envelopes. Paul didn't have a computer at home. In the store, there was an old CRT monitor used only for the register system, a screen that took time to light up, a keyboard worn down on the number keys. Even so, the word mail already gave him a chill in his stomach. If the movie could arrive straight in the metal box on the porch, what would make anyone cross the rain to step into Gem City Video? That late winter turned into a sequence of small losses, almost polite, recorded more by what stopped happening than by any dramatic scenes. On Thursday, March 11th, Paul watched through the window as the Hollis family drove right past without stopping, windshield wipers keeping time. The mother, who always returned tapes with an apologetic note when she was late, had said the week before that she was going to try the new place just to see, like someone testing an alternative without admitting it was a switch. On Monday, March 22nd, the new releases shelf had empty spaces that were not from rented movies, but from tapes Paul didn't have money to buy. New releases required constant investment, and turnover no longer kept up. The distributor in Cincinnati had demanded payment in advance, common practice when small retail credit tightened and the risk of non-payment was pushed onto the shopkeeper. Paul held the phone in his hand for a minute, listening to the dead tone after hanging up, and then went to the back of the store where the old carpet smelled of dust and warm plastic, and counted the return boxes the way someone counts heartbeats, checking labels and dates with the routine of someone trying to keep order when the register won't balance. Even so, Gem City Video still breathed through routines that seemed small but held the place up. On Fridays, around 7 p.m., Mr. Donnelly would come in, a widower living in an apartment above a repair shop on Wayne Avenue. And he always rented 2 old movies, a Western and a noir, chosen with the precision of a settled habit. He didn't say good evening. He said the title of the movie he wanted, as if it were a prescription, and waited for the receipt printed on the thermal roll that sometimes came out faint. On Saturday afternoons, teenagers from Belmont High School showed up in groups of 3 or 4, flipping through cases and arguing about which horror movie was scarier. They left the air in the store smelling of chewing gum and street cold, hands red from coming without gloves. And there was the girl who came with her grandmother, always with the same care in how she held the boxes. Maribel Santos, 11 years old, living on Xenia Avenue, daughter of parents who worked shifts at Miami Valley Hospital, a rhythm of rotations that organized home life in a broken-up hours. Maribel liked the animation section and also an improvised corner where Paul had set a small television to run VHS trailers, the image slightly grainy, the sound low so it wouldn't compete with the room. She had a notebook with stickers and sometimes drew the store's logo, a simple blue diamond, on the back cover, repeating the line as if fixing a place in her mind. At the beginning of April, the wind still came cutting off the great Miami River, and Dayton had that low gray sky that seems to press down on rooftops, with days of shifting temperature and dampness slipping in through cracks. It was in that weather that Paul received the letter from the building's owner, dated April 5th, 1999, on the letterhead of a downtown real estate company. It was a single sheet, folded in thirds, with polite and final words. A rent increase in the next contract for market adjustment, a common formula that avoided long explanations. Paul read it sitting on the stool behind the counter, while the portable heater made a cricket-like noise and pushed up dry air that couldn't beat the cold near the front window. The increase wasn't outrageous for a restaurant or for a cell phone store, but for a small video rental shop, it was a blow that didn't need to be big to be fatal because the margin depended on volume and regularity that were already coming apart. The moral catalyst didn't come from a big announcement or a fight. It came on a Saturday afternoon, April 17th, when the sun finally appeared and the city seemed lighter, with people opening windows and cars moving more calmly. Paul put a donation box near the door. Use tapes for the community club, the paper said, with the idea of selling some old VHS for $1 and raising money to buy more DVDs, since the market was shifting and people were starting to ask for disc instead of tape. Around 3:40 p.m., the chime rang and a woman he recognized by sight came in. Denise Harper, a clerk at a pharmacy near Salem Avenue, used to long shifts and handling change and receipts. She held the hand of a thin boy, about 9, who looked at the floor. Denise went to the counter and, without preamble, said the mail service had reached the neighborhood. A coworker had shown her the red envelope with a DVD inside, like a trick, something modern and simple at the same time. She spoke with a joyless smile and asked Paul not to be angry. She couldn't afford any more late fees. The week before, her son had had a fever. She had missed a shift, and the tape sat on the kitchen table until the due date passed. The fine was small, but for someone counting dollars at the end of the month, small was an empty word because it added up with gas, electricity, rent, and groceries bought with calculation. Paul didn't answer with irritation. He opened the drawer, took her membership card, saw the red number of the fine, and for a few seconds stood still, the pen suspended as if it weighed more than it did. The boy squeezed his mother's hand, and the gesture was so ordinary and so fragile that it said more than any argument about the market. Paul crossed out the fine with a firm line, stamped the card, and said, in a low voice, that this time it was taken care of, like someone recording an exception without turning it into a spectacle. Denise didn't thank him with enthusiasm. She only let out her breath, as if breathing again, and put the card away carefully in her pocket. She hadn't asked for charity, and he hadn't performed a heroic act. Still, as Denise and the boy went to the children's section to choose a movie, Paul understood clearly that the store couldn't compete with the mall by trying to be cheaper, nor with the chain by trying to be bigger. What a small video store could do was be human in a way that didn't fit in an envelope or in a standardized customer service policy. It wasn't romanticism. It was a practical conclusion. Gem City Video already was, without Paul having planned it, a kind of public living room for people who didn't have a big living room or time or money for other distractions, in a neighborhood where leisure had to fit the budget in the walk or bus ride. That night, after closing at 9 p.m., Paul sat on the floor of the drama aisle, his back against the shelf. The smell of carpet and plastic grew stronger when the air conditioning shut off and the air stopped circulating. On a notepad, in the handwriting of someone who had learned bookkeeping in high school, he wrote, "Meeting point, club, coffee, screenings." He thought about putting a table and 2 chairs near the window so neighbors could talk without hurry in a neutral space. He thought about a children's movie night with free popcorn and a jar for voluntary donations, using what he already sold at the counter. He thought about making space for a neighborhood bulletin board, babysitting, guitar lessons, a couch for sale, messages that used to go on poles or in grocery stores. Reinvention wouldn't be a brilliant idea. It would be an arrangement of simple things sustained by presence, fixed hours, and a warm place in winter. At the beginning of May, with Dayton's trees opening new leaves and the air smelling of wet earth, Paul began to act. On Saturday, May 8th, 1999, he went to a hardware store near Miller Lane and bought a can of light beige paint, a roller, sandpaper, and a pack of warmer bulbs. Common maintenance items paid for the way one postpones another bill. He loaded everything into the trunk of the old Oldsmobile and went back to the store. He spent Sunday painting the back wall, marked by chairs and box scratches. The smell of paint stayed trapped in the carpet for days. He took down old posters, cleaned the front window glass with newspaper, and put up a new sign printed on a borrowed printer. Neighborhood night, Friday, May 21st. Movie conversation, open table. Free entry. The paper was taped along the edges, slightly wavy from humidity. He asked for help without ceremony. Donnelly showed up one afternoon, and, seeing Paul trying to assemble a low shelf for books and magazines, pulled a pocket knife from his pocket and helped adjust the wood without saying he was helping, like someone making a shop repair. Denise brought a used coffee maker she'd kept since last Christmas, the carafe a little stained from use. Maribel came with her grandmother and brought, wrapped in reused gift paper, a jar of colored pens for the board, as if it were school supplies. Her grandmother, white hair pinned in a bun, said the neighborhood needed places where people could stay without the obligation to buy expensive things. She spoke while looking at the shelves, as if the shelves were listening too, as if the space had value beyond what the register recorded. On May 21st, a Friday that was warm for the season, clear sky, and the smell of barbecue coming from backyards, Gem City Video stayed lit later. Paul pushed 2 shelves aside to open space in the center and set up folding chairs borrowed from a church on Linden Avenue, metal chairs that creaked when opened. The small television went onto a metal card, and he hooked up a VHS of VE because it was a known, safe movie, and because he wanted children and adults to watch without embarrassment, without having to explain preferences. At 7:30 p.m., there were 12 people. At 8 p.m., there were 23. It wasn't a crowd, but it was enough to change the air of the place, contain laughter, people greeting each other by name, plastic cups tapping, footsteps on worn carpet. Paul stayed behind the counter more out of habit than need, serving coffee and watching, attentive to what was missing and what was too much. He saw Denise sitting beside another mother he knew only by face. He saw Donnelly, who never seemed comfortable in groups, stand near the classics section and tell someone a movie had a scene that always made him think of home, as if commenting were the possible way to participate without exposing himself too much. At the end of the night, as people began to say goodbye, Paul felt something close to relief, but not a big happiness. It was the sense that the store still had a function, and function was a strong word in a time when everything seemed about to be replaced by faster, more impersonal formats. He locked the door at 10:47 p.m., turned off the lights one by one, and before leaving, stood looking at the new bulletin board, where there was already an ad for English lessons and another for rideshare needed to Columbus. The video store seemed less like a store and more like a notice board with movies around it, a passing point that became a place to stay for a few minutes. Summer arrived with the smell of cut grass and the constant sound of mowers on weekends, streets full of children and backyards in use. In June, Paul kept Friday nights as a ritual. Sometimes a children's movie, sometimes an old thriller, sometimes just recommendation exchange, with people bringing lists written on paper or torn from notebooks. He also set up a small shelf with a little sign, DVDs by mail? Not here. Here there's conversation. He found it a bit aggressive, but left it because it made people smile like someone recognizing the provocation. Even so, the register numbers stayed tight. Money from rentals fell, and donations for coffee and popcorn were symbolic, insufficient to cover fixed costs. The big chain, with its huge store and new carpets, seemed to suck up the flow of cars. And the mail service, which at first was rumor, became presence. Envelopes appeared in customers' hands, and some talked about the online catalog as if it were an ocean, with titles a small store could never stock. Paul listened without criticizing. He mentally noted what people wanted: faster new releases, fewer fines, more convenience. Convenience was a difficult word because you didn't fight it with kindness. It was also time and distance. The irreversible happened on a Thursday of heavy heat, July 15th, 1999. The sky was clear in the morning, but around 4 p.m. the air went still, and local newscasts began talking about isolated storms, summer formations that arrived fast and with strong wind. Paul had opened at 10 a.m. and, as always, left a return box outside, secured by a light chain, for anyone passing by without coming in. At 6:05 p.m., the wind arrived suddenly, carrying dust and leaf across the parking lot. The light inside the store blinked, a sign of fluctuation in the grid. Paul was in the comedy aisle, putting a tape back in place, when he heard a dry crack like with splitting. Before he could organize the thought, another sound came, deeper, and the front window vibrated like a drum, with air pressure hitting the glass. A strong gust partially tore off the old Gem City Video sign. Blue letters bolted to the brick. The metal came loose at one end and struck the front window glass, which already had micro cracks from age and temperature changes. The glass gave way with a sound that seemed unreal, a muffled blast, followed by a rain of fragments. The air inside the store filled with fine dust and the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Paul ran to the front by instinct, but stopped when he saw, on the floor near the entrance, Maribel. She had come in minutes earlier with her grandmother, escaping the wind, to return 2 movies and pick another. She was near the candy display, looking at the colorful boxes when the glass burst. A large fragment, shaped like an irregular blade, cut her forearm. Blood appeared quickly, dark and bright, and for a second the girl stood still, as if she needed to understand her own body before reacting. Her grandmother screamed her name, and the sound was swallowed by thunder breaking outside, followed by the heavy noise of rain beginning. Paul was not a hero. He was a man in the middle of an emergency. He grabbed the phone, dialed 911 with trembling fingers, and pressed a clean cloth, an old T-shirt used to wipe shelves, against Maribel's arm, trying to stop the flow. Denise, who by coincidence was coming in to pick up a movie, helped keep the girl seated, speaking to her in a firm tone, someone who had dealt with fevers and falls. The grandmother held her granddaughter's hand and prayed words that came out in mixed Spanish and English. The storm fully broke, pounding the sidewalk and blowing drops in through the broken frame. The floor became a mixture of water, blood, and shards reflecting the flickering light, making everything more confused and colder. The Dayton Fire Department ambulance arrived within minutes, siren short because of the wind and poor visibility. The paramedics entered carefully, stepping around the glass, put on thick gauze, taped it down, and took Maribel out on a stretcher. Paul saw her face pale, but conscious, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if she were watching a different kind of movie without a soundtrack. Her grandmother climbed into the ambulance with her, soaked by rain and shaking. The vehicle pulled away, leaving on the street a trail of water and a strange silence behind the storm's noise, as if the neighborhood had held its breath. After everything passed, the irreversible was not only the cut on the girl's arm, which would need stitches and leave scar. It was the destroyed front window, the broken sense of safety, and the fact that Paul's insurance was minimal, designed to cover little and with deductibles that didn't help with facade damage. The next morning, July 16th, with the sun returning as if nothing had happened, he stood at the door looking at the hole covered by clear plastic taped in place. The plastic ballooned and snapped with each gust of wind, and the store looked like an improvised house after a catastrophe too small to become big news. The estimate to replace the glass and repair the sign was more than he had, with rent and bills still running. The real estate company said, over the phone, that the facade repair was the tenant's responsibility, according to typical maintenance clauses in commercial leases. Paul wrote down the receptionist's name, hung up, and held the handset for a minute, listening to his own heart, as if the sound confirmed what the paper already said. In the days that followed, the community he had been trying to build showed up in a concrete way. Donnelly brought a piece of plywood and helped fasten it from the inside, reinforcing the plastic, measuring and adjusting with the patience of someone who has repaired doors before. Denise set out a donation jar on the counter, without asking permission, with a simple note, "For Gem City's glass." Some people left coins, others left folded bills, counted money that mattered to the giver, and, even so, was insufficient in total. A man Paul knew only as Rick from the gas station showed up with a box of work gloves and said he knew how to handle framing. Even with that, the money didn't add up. And there was another cost, harder to measure. Families with small children began to come in cautiously, looking at the plastic like a warning that the world passes through a wall easily, and that a familiar place can become a risk in seconds. Maribel came back at the beginning of August, on a hot afternoon, August 4th, 1999, with her arm bandaged and a new scar pinkish, showing near her wrist. She didn't cry when she entered, but she looked at the place where the glass had burst. Paul came out from behind the counter and approached slowly, as if entering a hospital room, respecting distance. He didn't say sorry in a dramatic way. He said he was very sorry and that he had thought about her every day since the storm. Maribel nodded and, in a small voice, said she didn't like the sound of wind anymore. Her grandmother thanked him for the help that day and put into the donation jar an envelope with folded money, more than Paul expected. He tried to refuse with gestures, but she shook her head, firm, and said the store was part of the neighborhood, as if it were an administrative fact, not an opinion. Autumn came early that year, with cool nights already in September and leaves beginning to yellow along Wilmington Pike, announcing the change of season ahead of time. Paul managed to replace the front window at the end of August with cheaper glass, without perfect finishing, and the sign returned smaller, made by an acquaintance who worked with signage, simpler material, and reinforced mounting. The repair left marks, a difference in tone in the frame, a corner that didn't fit as before. The store looked like it had been through something, the same way people do, carrying discrete signs of an incident that doesn't erase. Even so, the numbers kept falling. The big chain maintained aggressive promotions, and a mail service became common talk, absorbed into the neighborhood's vocabulary. In October, Paul received a letter from the bank denying a small line of credit he had requested to buy more DVDs. He read it sitting in the same chair as always, with the small television playing a repeated trailer, and realized that turning the video store into a meeting point had created something real, but not necessarily a sustainable business in the old sense, based on per-unit rentals and constant replenishment. The neighborhood needed that space, but the market didn't pay for emotional need, and the bills didn't accept that argument. On Saturday, November 13th, 1999, Dayton was cold and clear, with wind coming off the river and making people pull their coats tight. Paul put a notice on the door, large letters, last month of Gem City Video, closing on December 15th. He didn't write closed until further notice. He wrote like someone stamping a document, with date and purpose. The notice hung crooked, taped up, and even so it seemed too heavy for the door to bear, as if glass and would also had to hold up the news. Reactions were restrained, the way ordinary people react when they realize they can't change certain things. Denise read it and stood still for a while, hands in her coat pockets, and then asked if Paul had somewhere to go, like someone thinking logistics before emotion. Donnelly only nodded, as if he already knew, and chose 2 movies without comment, keeping the ritual to the end. Some teenagers made a sad joke, saying now there was only going to the giant place. Maribel, her scar already lighter, wrote on the bulletin board in blue pen, "Thank you for everything." Her grandmother brought homemade cookies in a tin, as if it were a small wake, but without crying, a gesture of kitchen and neighborhood. Paul decided that if the store was going to end as a store, it would not end as a place. He kept Friday nights until the end with almost ceremonial care, setting chairs, cleaning the coffee maker, restocking plastic cups. On Friday, December 3rd, he showed The Wizard of Oz and left the lights in the classic section on as if they were living room lamps, creating a softer glow in the aisle. On Friday, December 10th, he held a night without a movie, just coffee and an open table, and people brought old photographs, Christmas cards, newspaper clippings, things kept in drawers and boxes. One man talked about work at the old Delphi factory. Another commented on how downtown Dayton had changed since the 1980s. No one mentioned politicians or big decisions. They talked about buses that ran late, electric bills, children growing up. For a few hours, Gem City Video became a room where time seemed slower than outside, as if the clock on the counter kept a different rhythm. On the last day, December 15th, 1999, a Wednesday, the sky dawned with fine snow, more ice than flake, collecting along the edges of the sidewalk and leaving the street with a dull shine. Paul opened at 10 a.m. for the last time. The shelves were thin. Many movies had been sold at low prices, with improvised stickers and rounded amounts to make change easier. The new releases, labels no longer made sense. The bulletin board was full of farewell notes and phone numbers, as if people wanted to make sure the neighborhood wouldn't come apart along with the video store, moving contacts beyond the walls. At 6 p.m., Denise came with her son and returned the last movie, a DVD Paul had bought used. She didn't say she would miss it. She only said that place had helped during hard weeks. The boy looked at the empty shelves and asked, without understanding the weight, where the movies would sleep now. Denise answered that they would go to other houses. Near 7 p.m., Donnelly came in, took an old Western Paul had decided not to sell, and set it on the counter, as if returning a piece of his own routine. He pulled a folded bill from his pocket and pushed it slowly toward Paul, who tried to refuse with a gesture, but Donnelly pointed to the empty donation jar and said, in a hoarse voice, that it was for someone's coffee somewhere, as if the money needed to keep circulating in the form of a gesture. Maribel arrived with her grandmother at 7:40 p.m. She brought a drawing, the facade of Gem City Video with a blue sign and a big sun above it, even though in winter in Dayton the sun was more timid and lower. In a drawing, there were people coming and going, and in the corner a red mail envelope drawn small, almost hidden. Maribel handed the paper to Paul without ceremony, like returning a rental. Paul held the drawing carefully, as if it were a fragile object. The scar on her arm showed when she took off her coat, a pale line that would remain forever, recalling the July storm and the glass bursting, recalling that places also hurt and also try to care, and that the cost of space is not only rent. At 8:55 p.m., with the snow making a light sound against the new front window, Paul began turning off the section lights one by one. The last customer stayed until near the end, helping fold chairs, taking the remaining coffee, pulling from the bulletin board the notes they wanted to keep, folding papers like someone filing away records. There was no farewell speech. There was the sound of tape being pulled, boxes closing, keys clinking. Paul closed out the register without hurry, wrote the final amount in a notebook already near its end, and placed Maribel's drawing inside, between the pages, as a bookmark and a physical record among the numbers. At 9:23 p.m., he locked the door of Gem City Video for the last time. The street was quiet, and the yellow street lights reflected on the thin ice. The smaller sign swayed a little in the wind but didn't fall. Paul stood outside for a minute, looking in through the new glass, seeing the empty store like a set after people leave and the sound disappears. Then he pulled his coat tight, put his hands in his pockets, and walked to the Oldsmobile, leaving footprints that would soon be softened by snow. In the days that followed, the building would be rented for something else, the shelves would go to storage, and the movies would scatter in boxes through garages and thrift shops. But that room lit for years to receive neighbors had already done its work. The neighborhood would keep finding other points, a church, a laundromat, the line at a bakery, and some would still keep membership cards with a faded blue diamond, remembering a time when choosing a movie also meant seeing who was in the store, hearing a recommendation spoken without hurry, and feeling, for some ordinary hour, that Dayton was smaller and closer than it seemed from outside. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to like the video. It helps these often forgotten stories find the audience they deserve. Subscribe to Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Times to stay connected to stories of everyday people who lived through moments that shaped history. Each life mattered. Each story deserves to be remembered. We'd love to hear from you as well. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This community stretches across places, generations, and personal histories, brought together by a shared respect for the past. Thank you for being here, and thank you for helping keep these stories alive.